From the deepest depths of hell to the gates of heaven in 5 hours. Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to today's report. Today's report was sent in by Chris G, where he took cannabis, questionably, as we don't know, as it might have been a synthetic, Phenibut, IV fluids, and Midazolam. And here's the full report details. Alright, here's a laced weed report, and an actual one, I think. Sometimes we cover these, and it's questionable if someone's just having a panic attack or not. But this one includes professional aid, where his vitals were read. The weed he gets sounds really sketchy to begin with, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was a synthetic of some sort. He had some Phenibut as well, and does get medical attention, where he gets treated with fluids and the benzo Midazolam. This is super detailed and well written. It gets really intense, so I'm sure you guys will enjoy this one. So without further ado, let's dive right into this. We laced with synthetic cannabinoids experience report. I know it's long, but I think you and your viewers will enjoy it. Smiley face, heart. These 5 to 7 hours hold an incredibly special place in my heart, and writing this will inevitably take some effort, since I haven't recounted this through text in over a year, and it was incredibly traumatizing. Anyway, let's go. Smiley face. So this happened to me on February 12th, 2019, a date that will forever live in my personal infamy. For reference, not to sound like a cliche trip report writer, I have a lot of experience with weed. From the beginning of 2018 to around September of 2018, I smoked copious amounts of weed every day. Living in Los Angeles at the time, it was kind of just a given for a young adult musician. Therefore, I have a lot of experience with every way weed can affect you, the good, the bad, and the terrifying. This, however, completely subverted everything I ever knew about the cannabinoid receptor, and I haven't been able to smoke weed since. Around the time this happened, I still had a tolerance to weed. This will come into play later. Prior to this experience, I have ate distillate just 3 days before. Distillate being upwards of 97% pure THC. This tolerance is most likely what saved my life and preserved my sanity. It all started with me inviting my FYB at the time, Kirsten, to come over to smoke and watch a movie. I bought a quarter of weed from an acquaintance of mine to smoke with Kirsten. The method he used to package the weed was red flag number 1. It came in a plastic bubble filled with air. Maybe this isn't as big of a deal as I think it is, but it was definitely unusual. I wanted to smoke some before Kirsten got to my apartment, so I rolled a shitty, filtered joint with my roller. The weed smelled pretty good, but with a strange, gassy smell. Not a weed gassy smell, but a chemical gassy smell. I thought it might have just been the strain, as I've had some pretty wild smelling real weed before. I thought nothing of it before lighting it. The first hit I took didn't hit me very hard, as I expected, so I smoked around a fifth of the joint. It was around the same length as a normal cigarette, and I was satisfied. I ended up getting way higher than I thought I would, but I disregarded it as just being strong weed. This weed also took quite a bit longer to come off than normal, which was strange to me at the time, but I thought nothing of it. At around the 10-minute mark, it started ramping up in intensity a seriously notable amount. I thought it would be funny that I was so high before she even got there, so again, I wrote it off. At around the 12-minute mark or so, I started getting an incredibly strong shooting pain up both my legs and what felt like a painful electrical shock in my abdomen. This came out of nowhere, alongside sudden, intense dissociation and anxiety. However, it wasn't really anxiety. I felt more like I was going into shock. Psychologically, I was relatively calm compared to the amount of anxiety my body was feeling, if that makes any sense. I stood up, walked to my bathroom, and started laughing in the mirror about how fucking stupid it was that I was actually having a panic attack on weed. I prepared about 7 grams of Phenibut and walked back to my desk. It was strange, because all my panic attacks I've had from weed, my mind is usually the one that's detached from the reality of the situation. My heart rate is generally significantly lower than I think it is, and my body has never felt like this. It was almost like the roles in the attack were swapped. This time, my body was thinking it was gonna die rather than my mind. I eventually got back to my desk where I was on Discord with my best friend Patrick and our online friend Logan. We were about to play some Siege before this all happened. As they were in game, my dissociation started to become strange and relatively intense for what I've experienced during weed panic attacks. I started getting very angry at myself and my situation. I started ranting for around 2 minutes about how much I hate panic attacks and how stupid I am for having one. I completely lost sight of my situation during this time and started to realize what I was doing shortly after. This realization of complete detachment caused insurmountable anxiety. My depth perception was becoming less apparent and my derealization was growing. I also started to see this red tinge over everything. This was supplemented by a ring of what looked like transparent gore, voids, like when you close your eyes on LSD and your eyes cannot feel an end, and red water. It was pulsing, almost to my heartbeat. Mind you, this is all just 15 to 20 minutes after I started smoking. After this incredibly increase in intensity, I slammed both my hands on my desk and told Patrick and Logan that something was really wrong and that I didn't think it was weed. They were both confused, but quickly understood after I mustered up what little composure I had left to explain the situation to them. I ended up desperately trying to maintain composure by walking to my window and turning on the fan I had by it. I stood in front of the fan for around a minute and felt slightly better. I thought that everything was going to be alright after this, and that the Phenibut would kick in soon. This was a complete farce, as it was only around 10 minutes since I took it, and Phenibut takes an hour and a half for the come up to even start. Everything became way too real when I walked away from the fan. This is still by far one of the most terrifying moments of my entire life. For reference, my desk and chair were only around 5 feet from my window. Anyway, as I started to walk away from the fan, life took a back seat for some moments. Not just my vision, but my entire reality slowed down to a halt, and I was seeing in roughly 10 FPS. The walk back felt like 10 seconds, and my reality was almost completely shot. As I walked back, every other frame of my vision was completely replaced with a memory I had completely forgotten about. Memory, reality, memory, reality, etc. They were completely separate memories with completely different emotions attached that played like a slideshow, intersecting my reality. It felt like, based on all descriptions of it I have known, my life was flashing before my eyes. This was it. This was the real introduction to this nightmare. This was the beginning of the climax of the story arc. I told my friends that I knew this wasn't weed, and that this was very serious. They were confused, but I took off my headphones and frantically walked into my bathroom area. I texted Kirsten that I was having the worst panic attack of my life and to not come over. This made me more comfortable in the moment, but in retrospect, seeing a person could have really calmed me down. Walking out into my living room was a daunting task. Every feeling I've experienced before was ramping up. The shocks in my body were melting into an ever-present, constant sensation. It had no motion, no shape, no profile. It was just a sensation. Actually, it felt like the ultimate sensation. It had no words in its intensity. It felt like everything at once, if that makes any sense. It wasn't euphoric. It wasn't dysphoric. It wasn't painful. It wasn't comfortable. It just was. The more I stood still, the more this feeling overcame me. This caused me to pace back and forth around my living room for a few minutes. The physical effects were really starting to show themselves at this point as well. My heart rate felt like a machine gun, and this time, it wasn't just my perception playing tricks on me. It really was this high. I was sweating buckets and could not sit still for more than a few seconds. My entire body was moving almost on autopilot. I could not stop moving. I had the strangest feeling of dissociation I had ever felt. It felt like I had complete control over my inner monologue, but I was completely disconnected from reality. Speaking was an incredible task. It felt like my words weighed 1,000,000 pounds. I could perfectly form sentences in my head, but actually speaking them was almost impossible. This combined with an immeasurable level of dry mouth caused an incredible communication delay. It felt like my lips and tongue were glued to the roof of my mouth and my teeth. This furthered my feelings of impending doom. I could feel my heart lock up and flutter every couple minutes. It stopped me dead in my tracks, and every time I would almost scream in fear and just about run out of my door. I was also hallucinating quite a bit, quite possibly the most sinister, terrifying, and devilish hallucinations I could imagine. As far back as I remember, everything was tinted red. My vision was extremely choppy and repeatedly go out for a second, as if there was a light switch in the back of my eye socket, before turning on again. After it would turn on, my vision would freeze on a single frame for around half a second before continuing motion. This didn't help. Frames of vision would sometimes blur together like a crossfade, but with highly detailed blur, if that makes any sense. This wasn't the extent of the visuals, however. The red tint was more of a vignette of red around my vision. Inside this vignette, there was a transparent gore that seemed to grow in vividness the longer I focused on it. It was faint, but seeing it set a horrible vibe. I could see faces pop out at me before twitching and disappearing, and they were always comically threatening and scary, like a child's drawing of a scary face. Around the 20-minute mark, shadow people started appearing. I would see fully defined shadows sprinting away from me in my peripherals. Sometimes, when I would look in a particular direction, I would momentarily see this very tall shadow person standing in the corner of my vision before strafing to the side and vanishing. He was like the typical depiction of a demon. Large horn-like spikes at the top of his head, tall stature, bright white eyes, and either no mouth or a large white hole where his mouth would be. Once the shadow people started, my paranoia became significantly worse. I would feel like someone tall was lurching over behind me, putting their head near the back of either one of my shoulders and just staring into the backside of my head with their arms crossed behind their back, as if someone was intentionally breathing down the back of your neck. I would sometimes see this figure standing behind me as I looked behind me to debunk this paranoia. That definitely didn't help me keep a grip on my reality. I eventually got so paranoid that I just went and sat down with my back to my stove to prevent anything from possibly being behind me. When I closed my eyes, I would just see my own face in frightening detail, every facial expression, every movement, etc. When I would move my head, it would appear like the motion tracking effect in a video editing software. This caused me to immediately open my eyes every time, gasping in fear. One time, I saw my eyes open with my eyes closed, and it almost made me piss my pants. I ended up calling 911 in the middle of all this, shortly after I entered the living room. It was kind of funny. The first thing I said to the operator was that I needed an ambulance because the weed I got wasn't weed. That's all I said at first, and all I could say due to my difficulties with being able to muster more than a single word every couple seconds. Of course, the operator was confused and thought it was a prank call. I clarified that it was laced, and she understood. I struggled to give her my address and name, but was successful, and she said they would be over there ASAP. During this entire ordeal, I kept hearing this devilish music playing in the background. It was music that I can only describe as being plucked straight from hell. I put on a favorite song of mine with the hopes of calming me down, but the music I was hallucinating actually overpowered that. It was very repetitive and sinister sounding music, coupled with the occasional faint whisper of my name that sounded like someone was quickly running past me while whispering my full name, and the various zaps, beeps, and glitches of the music. This was probably the most terrifying hallucinatory effect of the experience. Shortly after the call, while I was continuing to pace, I recall a large lapse in my memory, roughly 7 minutes or so. All I remember before this lapse was sitting down before becoming very faint, and randomly standing up with no thought afterwards. Overall, the ambulance took around 15 minutes to get there, but it simultaneously felt like it took 2 minutes and 2 hours. I ended up calling 911 back because I was convinced they weren't coming because they were going to let me die. The operator said that the ambulance and police had been waiting outside for around 5 minutes. I thanked her probably 10 times and hung up the phone. I walked out in shorts, a tank top, and no shoes down my apartment staircase and quickly walked to the street. Now, at the time, I was living with a friend, and we both sold drugs. We had essentially what can be described as 2 life sentences worth of various psychedelics and entheogens in our apartment. So I was afraid that the police might be inclined to search it. Thus, I just brought the quarter of weed or so with me downstairs in an effort to prevent them from gaining reasonable doubts to search my apartment. Thankfully, it worked, and I only came out of it with a possession charge instead of a lifetime in federal prison. I was so relieved to see other human beings and felt so much more comfortable. But this wasn't the end of it. The worst had yet to come. No, the experience had only started around 25 to 30 minutes before this, and only got worse with time before plateauing around 5 minutes before I left my apartment. I gave the police the laced weed and told them to throw it away because it had something in it other than weed. They said they would decide whether or not to throw it out depending on my priors. I did not give a fuck whatever they charged me with, so long as I got proper medical attention. They ended up coming back and asking my name and how it was spelled like 4 times. Every subsequent question felt like it lasted minutes, and was only making me more agitated and afraid. The last 2 times I answered, I was angrily yelling. He eventually got it, and I signed the ticket. I wish I still had the ticket, because the signature was hilarious. It was essentially just a bunch of random scribbles that vaguely resemble letters. In the gurney, my health issues started to rapidly worsen. The first time they took my vitals, I had a resting heart rate of 194 beats per minute with a blood pressure around 180 over 115. I looked at the machine, and I was essentially accepting my death. I could see the worry on the female emergency nurse on my left. The male nurse just looked at her, completely shocked. I could hear him mutter to another nurse, "This is bad." They acted like I was deaf, and it fucking broke my heart. They asked me what I had taken, and I said nothing but Phenibut, my antidepressant, and this weed. He asked me what Phenibut was, and I explained. He said, "Well, you never know how drugs will react, so you gotta be careful." And I quickly and angrily snapped back with, "I fucking know how these react together, and this is not what fucking weed does to you, dumbass." They told me to calm down, and I gave it a shot, I guess. They also said it could have been LSD, something which I vehemently disagreed with. I said, "No, I have taken LSD almost 100 times with no issues like this. If it was LSD, I might have actually been enjoying myself right now." I kept asserting that it was not weed. I have had a multitude of weed, psychedelic, and dissociative panic attacks, and not a single one of them was even remotely similar to this. I could not stop moving in the gurney. It felt like someone was taking electrodes to all my limbs to stimulate movement. My ankles kept locking up, and I could not stop clenching my fist. But also, I had no strength. I could barely grab the pen without using both hands. My heart rate stayed consistent, but ended up peaking at 204 beats per minute during a high episode of anxiety and movement. My body was on fire. It felt like someone was taking a hot pan to every inch of my body every 2 seconds. The pain I was feeling combined with my progressively worse dry mouth was making it hard to maintain optimism. My dry mouth eventually got so bad that I couldn't speak because my mouth kept locking up and not moving. I had to basically spit in my own mouth to move it. My chest kept getting these stabbing pains in a sort of vertical line that stretched from the top left of my chest down to the right side of my stomach. This, plus a severe locking up of my arms. It was terrifying. It felt like I was on the edge of life and death. Eventually, they put an IV into my arm. Let me tell you, the feeling of the alcohol pad on my skin was incredible. With how large all my veins were on my body, I could almost feel it cool the blood. When they finally put the IV in, I felt a relief I'd never felt in my life. However, this didn't stop the physical symptoms of the overdose. I finally started to convulse. Hard. It was probably the most painful thing I've ever experienced. I first started to relax for a second before the convulsions started progressing from my feet up to my head. First my feet, legs, and ankles started to all lock up simultaneously. The feeling was a pain I can only describe as hellish. It felt like someone was slowly ripping the top layer of skin off of my legs, only to electrocute the legs into locking up. This progressed into my upper body, wherein I felt like my lower abdomen lock up before my arms started to lock up into a sort of cross. My right hand was locked up and pressing against my left forearm. Both of them were hovering above my chest. I then started to feel my facial muscles lock up. Muscles that I didn't even know you could flex were flexing. My head started to lock up and tilt down and right, and I started freaking out. I told them that I think I was about to have a seizure, and they legit said, no, if you were having a seizure, you would be awake. And I said in response, no, I said I think I'm about to have one, and I'm convulsing. Please help me. The female nurse to my left was scrambling. She looked absolutely terrified. The male nurse eventually said, so we're gonna give you something for that. We're gonna give you Versed. It's a benzodiazepine. You know what that is? She finally injected the Midazolam into the IV, and within around 15 seconds, my muscles started to relax. It was the most bizarre, relieving thing I have ever experienced. She put up a thumb and asked, you alright? And I said, barely conscious? Yeah, and put a thumb up with a smile on my face. Right before I went unconscious, I remember feeling like I was about to cry. Almost all the symptoms went away. The red tint disappeared. The pain mostly subsided. My muscles were relaxed completely. They ended up hitting me with 7 milligrams of midazolam, which is roughly equivalent to 8 milligrams of alprazolam, Xanax. I blacked out for a minute before quickly coming back to consciousness for a second. All I remembered before slipping back in was water on my face. I awoke, bawling. I was crying so hard I couldn't stop moving. I was simultaneously happy and terrifyingly depressed. I knew I was gonna die. I was dead. There was no bringing me back. But I was happy that these people were here to help me. I was eternally grateful for their help. But they knew I was gonna die, and so did I. I kept exclaiming, I'm gonna fucking die. I love you guys, but I'm gonna die. I appreciate your help so much, but it's over for me. I love you guys. I love, insert family and friend names here, and I'll see you all soon. It was astoundingly heartbreaking, profound, and retrospectively beautiful. It was quite possibly the most profound moment of my entire life. I felt the maw of death staring right into my soul, and it felt okay. I felt peaceful and had a strong feeling of acceptance. I was sad, but also happy that I got to live out such a significant life. Of course, the nurses were telling me how I wasn't gonna die while chuckling, but I vehemently disagreed with them, all before blacking out again. I woke in the hospital 5 hours later and eventually Ubered home with a smile on my face. I felt amazing, like my life had new meaning. It felt amazing to be home and alive. I started crying happy tears on the way back because of how grateful I was to still be alive. I got home, took some kratom, and went to sleep. When I awoke the next morning, I was ecstatic. As terrifying as it was, I wouldn't take it back in a million years.